These are the 5 habits that have significantly improved my games of 40k. Hello and welcome to Epic Flail 40k Tactics. My name's Luke, and this week I will be mostly talking about good habits. In particular, the things that have really made a difference to my games of 40k. Good behavioural habits that I've forced myself to get into that have led to some really positive results in my games. By the end of this video, hopefully you'll have a good idea of the things that have really made a difference and be able to draw out a few nuggets of wisdom for yourself. Let's get started. I've been doing this for a while now, but I wanted to start with this one because I had a couple of practice games recently where I was picking up a new faction for me. It's an army I've been collecting for a little while with Sisters of Battle, but I've never actually played a game with them. And I want to get some practice in with some tournaments because I want to take them to LGT. Now, in doing so, I asked my friend to just do the scores for me to get used to using the units, get used to sequencing things and practice. And it really stuck out for me how much not having a clear grasp of the score at any given time was actually really annoying. It was almost quite crippling in terms of forming effective plans, because without constant tabs on what the point differences are, how much I might need to push for certain objectives, it actually made forming a game plan really difficult. And so this might be a really simple, duh moment for a lot of you, but not everyone does this, and they might rely on just casually letting their buddy do it, or even if they're tracking the score, not paying enough attention to it. So it's one thing to track the score, but actually keep a note of how many primary points you've got left to score, and then the same for your opponents, because we're faced with lots of decision points in the game, and often those decision points are, do I want to try and take that objective, swing an objective, deny my opponent some primary points here? The vast majority of the time the answer to that is going to be yes, because that's a good thing to do. But there will be moments where, do we need to expend a unit? Have we actually already secured enough of a lead where we don't need to necessarily expose our units? Maybe they could be better spent doing something else that turn. Or if we're falling so far behind on the points, but we haven't been keeping tabs of it because we've maybe gone on tilt, or we've just get our head down a little bit and just thought, oh, we're losing this game, it doesn't matter. Actually understanding what the difference is, and if we go for a big push on a turn later in the game, is that going to score us enough to actually catch up? We could miss opportunities if we don't have a solid grasp of the scores. There's all sorts of score sheets out. I've got a score sheet that you can download for free in the video description. And there's also an app that exists as well, which is really good, that I've used before. Tabletop Battles or something like that. There's plenty of ways to do it effortlessly, and it is a really good habit to do so. As I say, something I've done for a long time now, but having those recent practice games where I was a bit lazy and just lent on my opponent to do that for me so I could just focus on some other things, it just brought home again how important it is to have that awareness of the score, not just tracking it, but real awareness and understanding to help formulate our plans. Which leads me nicely into the next solid habit, and that is actually having a plan. Now, I've talked about this in the past, and deploying with intent, deploying with a purpose, not just popping your miniatures down and hoping for the best. You can check out my video on deployment here, which goes into a bit more detail. But this goes beyond deployment. During our opponent's turn, we should be thinking ahead when it's our turn, so that when it's our turn, we can act a bit quicker, not run out of time, not feel like we're under pressure. Granted, you have to wait until you draw your cards for the turn if you're playing tactical, which can dictate how much you can realistically plan. But having an idea at the very least of targets you want to get rid of and primary objectives you want to try and push for is going to be helpful. It's tempting just to go straight into moving models, but this key habit will help us to make better decisions the more we just take a moment to pause and be thinking in our opponent's turns, to give ourselves a good amount of time, and then just take a moment before we actually start moving models in our turn. Once we've looked at what our objectives are, where our opponent's going to be, what they could be doing to react, assessing our cards, thinking critically about how we're actually going to score. If we run up a move, is there any reactive moves? Is there any overwatch we need to worry about? Heroic interventions? What are our opponents going to do to try and get in the way of our plans as well? And that should be baked into how we then actually move or shoot, charge, etc. Which then leads me nicely into my third good habit, and that is protecting our units. Now, my first army was Imperial Guard, so I'm very used to throwing troops under the bus at the drop of a hat if I need to score some points. I'm not so attached to my units that I don't mind when they inevitably die in glory for the Emperor. But what is important to try and do is protect things as much as possible without hamstringing ourselves, specifically not being sloppy. Again, I think about this practice game I had the other day, and a unit of witches charged some novitiates, and I just went to pick them up. There's only 5 novitiates, being charged by 5 witches, and I thought, oh yeah, pick them up. The witches will do the job. My opponent was saying, no, always roll it out. And generally I will, unless I feel like it's really certainly going to happen. But lo and behold, he whiffed a bit, and 2 models stayed alive, which meant that a unit of mandrakes had to then be diverted to deal with them, and that unit of mandrakes couldn't just go on an objective. So it was an annoying thing for my opponent to have to then think about. And I could have just picked up that unit. Don't just assume that stuff's going to die just because it's a big scary unit. This is something that even now I try to not just write things off and make people roll things out and don't be talked into anything. But in the interest of speeding through the game and not wasting time, it's tempting just to go, oh yeah, no, that's gone. So just take a moment, think, actually, how likely is it? What are the saves here? Maybe we should roll this out. I could have a couple models left alive. And then there's the standard things like making sure we understand threat ranges, agreeing what the conditions are with our opponent verbally, confirming you both understand what they are so that no one's getting caught out, and make sure units actually do something. If that something is to stand in the way of another unit, that's totally fine, but we want to try and make sure we're getting value out of our units, not just putting them in harm's way. So if they don't need to be pushed out forward or in range of enemy charges or gunlons, then hide them. Take the time to make sure your units are protected. Everything's got a role, and it's essential we don't just give up on small insignificant units because they're not as flashy as some of the big guns or chopper units in our army, but actually they could be really useful later in the game to get a key objective or secondary mission. Always want to be asking ourselves, am I ready to lose this unit? Does it actually need to be here? Can it wait? Can it hide and then be useful in a subsequent turn? Double checking our positioning and always thinking about where our opponent can reach. It's about avoiding unnecessary losses. If you're deliberate about every unit's placement and ensure it's contributing to your overall strategy, you'll find yourself making fewer costly mistakes. If you're enjoying this video so far, then why not give us a like? Or better yet, check out Epic Flail HQ. Paul and I make additional content over at Epic Flail HQ, including members-only tactics videos and After Dark shows. If you're interested in becoming a member, it's $2.99 a month. You get access to our Discord, and you get to hang out with the best 40k community in the world. Oh, we also stream some UKTC events too. There's plenty to see over at Epic Flail HQ. This next one is focused on Pariah Nexus, the secret missions. Now, it's easy for me to say, do secret missions. That's the advice, that's the habit. But specifically, it's really good to be planning them from the get-go. If you've got something in your army, a perfect example, I was tinkering with demon lists, and Be'lakor was in my demon list for a long time. It has to be the warlord, but people will try actively to remove him. And he's got some decent shooting and his ability to protect units from range as well. So he's often getting in the thick of it. And the change I was thinking of was to cut him and have something with lone operative as the warlord, so that I've got baked into my list a way of accessing or presenting at the very least that I could go for that secret mission of having a relatively small model with lone operative that's able to leave play with the demon strap and then deep strike down within 3 inches to really put a bit of pressure on to get that secret objective. If I just keep the changeling back, then I'm representing that I've got that as a potential secret mission, in addition to if I then load out the list with a lot of battle line or simply just a lot of fast multiple units, so I can run out and be all over the objectives for Unbroken Wall. That is an example of where I'm keeping secret missions in mind even before I've played a game. So being prepared to use them, not just as things have gone tits up and now I've got to think about a secret mission on the fly because I realise I'm just not going to win this game at this rate and I haven't really thought about it anymore than just right now and I don't know what to do. What secret mission do I go for? It's just not a good position to be in. Actually, being prepared and understanding how they work is really good. There's been enough games now and shared experience across the internet with secret missions that they are really relevant and they do change games. Unlike the Gambits where we all read them once and then never used them. These are actually really impactful and absolutely need to be factored into what we're doing. Not only that, it's defending against them as well. So having a solid grasp and incorporate that into our own list building and our own planning, but also how we're thinking about responding to our opponents as well. Because if we start off well out the gates, it's very likely that our opponent's going to go for a secret mission to try and catch up. This is something that I've forcing myself to think about a lot more recently and is making a big difference in the games that I'm playing. Another subtle change with Pariah Nexus was the redrawing cards ability. For 1 CP, you can redraw a card you don't like or that you can't score, but you're not able to just automatically discard it. And before, it was often anecdotally said it's a trap to redraw your first card. And that was because it was so valuable. You could only do it once per battle. You wanted to save it to see if it actually is going to get you out of a hole rather than just firing it off early and maybe it doesn't materialise into anything good. Now it's the opposite. Don't be afraid to discard and redraw the secondaries. We want to be maximising points, and now that restriction's gone, then that is the perfect way to do so, especially if you draw 2 dud cards. We don't want to hold on to anything that's going to hinder us scoring, so spend a CP to get rid of one, and then get rid of one in exchange for a CP at the end of the turn. I've tried to score sabotage with units because I've seen it's possible for me to attempt it. I've attempted it, and then that unit, it just gets killed. The next turn, when I'm then sitting there and thinking, oh, I've still got sabotage, and I'm probably going to have the same experience again where I'm going to run out, try and score it, they're going to get killed. So unless you're in a position where it's late in the game with sabotage, something where you've really got to expose yourself and wait to score it, really have to ask ourselves, am I actually going to score this? Is it going to come back round to my turn, and am I actually going to achieve that card? And in my experience with these earlier games, more often than not, with cards like sabotage, you're just not going to score it because you turn that unit into a bullet magnet. And so in those scenarios, it's best just to get rid. With some easier ones, the opposite can be true, of course. If you draw no prisoners turn 1, your opponent's hid a lot of their army, and you're thinking, okay, I've got no targets now, but turn 2 onwards, they're going to come out to try and score some bright rays to keep no prisoners, because it's almost guaranteed you're going to get something to shoot at or charge from turn 2. So in those scenarios, yeah, maybe you do keep it and you think that's fine. So at that point, you're weighing up, is there value in the CP here? The other thing to note is if your opponent knows you've got a particular secondary, then they can plan for that as well. So that, in conjunction with the fact that some of them can be quite hard to score, if you're holding on to these stubbornly thinking, oh no, I'll get them next turn, changing that perception of it and thinking, actually, these are all reasons why I should just get rid of it. Don't give my opponent the free information about what is going to be happening and what they're going to need to be doing next turn, and keep it a mystery. Another way of thinking about this is, I've rarely regretted discarding a card, but almost every time I've held on to a card, I've really regretted it. If we're drawing bad secondaries, we're going to be scoring less than our opponents. And the solution to that is getting rid of them to try and fish for something better to make sure that as many cards in our hand as possible are actually scoreable. This is a habit that I found quite transformational when it comes to scoring in Pariah Nexus, and often significant losses are attributed to the fact that I've tripped up on secondary scoring. Since putting this into practice, I've scored more in my games. But these are just a handful of things that you can focus on to improve 40k. And I explore more in this video here, where I go back through the fundamentals of 40k and some more reflections to help improve. Well, that's all from me for now. Thanks very much for watching. Keep rolling those dice and stay tuned for more.